Welcome to Life by Design. I'm your host, Robyne, and I am thrilled to welcome you to this space for real conversations about how we live, how we show up day in and day out, because the quality of our life is shaped by our habits. What we do in ordinary time allows us to be extraordinary. We can unpack what it takes to truly live well and be well in real life. Welcome to Life by Design. And I'm just so excited that you're here. Welcome to this week's episode of Life by Design. Now, this is a wee bit of a switch up. I was recently interviewed by the one and only Jordana Goldlist. Now, she is a defense attorney in Toronto, and let me tell you, she is a force of nature for good. And what was so remarkable when I had a chance to go to the studio and she interviewed me is she asked questions that unlocked a lot of parts of my story that I don't traditionally share. And it was aired on her podcast, Who Judges the Judge, which is an amazing look at the legal system, but also just what it takes to be able to navigate the world right now with all of these different competing entities. So she is an amazing listen. She's also an amazing interviewer, and we asked her permission if we could air her episode of her interviewing me on this week's episode of Life by Design. So the switch, it feels like the tables have turned, so to speak. No wonder this woman is such a successful attorney. She knows how to ask key questions, and I hope you enjoy this episode. And very much it's a testament to hope and how powerful it is when we ask the right questions, but also when the right people cross our path. So I hope you enjoy this episode. And thanks again to Jordana and her team for letting us air her episode on Who Judges the Judge on this episode of Life by Design.
Dr. Robyne.
I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. I feel like it's been a year since we met. And then the day we met, we were like, oh no, we need to coordinate your podcast, my podcast. Let's 100%. Make this happen. And it's taken this long to get to this stage. But, in preparation, I obviously went to your website, more so to see what you've been doing lately and to see how you describe yourself. And, you describe yourself as an educational behaviorist and one of the few in the world. Yeah. I have never heard of an educational behaviorist. I'm sure there are many of my listeners that have never heard of an educational behaviorist. Talk to us. What is an educational behaviorist?
So essentially, in terms of my educational background, so I started in the field of behavioral science, which is a part of psychology, and went down that route of education and got to work with people, groups, communities all over the world, understanding human behavior in practice. And what I have now been able to do is help people basically unpack the behaviors, the habits, the skills, rituals, routines that make up their day. So I work with teams and groups and organizations and people one-on-one, figuring out how to design a good day on purpose.
Wow.
Yeah.
I feel like everyone needs one of you.
There you go. It's a wee bit of psychology, some coaching, just a little bit of again, that little bit of just kind of understanding our habits, because the quality of our life depends on our habits. And when our habits are locked in and in alignment with our goals and our values, we tend to have a pretty good day. When our habits are out of alignment and they are leaning us kind of in a different direction, that's usually when we get ourselves into hot water and trouble.
Wow. Okay, so you start off going to university for psychology.
Yes.
What's the journey for you through your education to get to a point where you are a behaviorist, as your moniker? Yeah.
So there's so many different fields of psychology that folks can pursue. Similar to law, there's many different facets. And behaviorism, I think, often is a wee bit misunderstood because it's usually getting associated with Skinner and the rat box and the old behaviorism that we would learn about. But the reality is behaviorism actually leans into a lot of cognitive psychology, a lot of industrial psychology. And what it does is, again, really looks at how we participate in our life. And again, the habits, the routines, the rituals. And then what that does, again, it unlocks people to be able to live more in value alignment, to be able to achieve the goals that they're setting out for themselves, all through the practice of systems. So where I took a real interest in behaviorism is recognizing that we can spend a lot of time in the past, and, psychoanalytic theory goes a lot into our past. That's where essentially we blame everything on our family system of origin. And there's a place for that. And there's people who do that really, really well.
Right.
And there's a place for, social work within it. There's all of these different offshoots. But what I discovered is that when people are going through it, like when people are having a really hard time, we're just interested in what does it take to get to the shore? Like, it doesn't matter what got you into that situation, and we can solve that or work to visit that later on. But when people are in a crisis, how quickly can we get you safe? What does that look like? And what I saw is that behaviorism was the solution for a lot of people.
At what point in your education do you see that? Like, do you go out and start practicing psychology in the sort of traditional therapy setting? Or do you learn about behaviorism in school and think, no, this is the path I want?
It's a really great. That's a really great question. So because I had my first kind of exposure to behaviorism, I was noticed that when I went in to learn about the other fields and pursued my education at the post-secondary level, I did have a wee bit of a bias where I'm just like, yeah, but we could fix that if we did this, right? I like being a bit of a fixer and a problem solver and that critical thinking and application. So again, I learned about the other fields, and I worked in the field. I worked as a therapist, worked as an addiction counselor. There were seasons where I worked in children's protective services. Like, I had all these different exposures. I did internship working in the prison system. Like, I had these experiences, and then I really thought that focusing on education, teaching people essentially like how your nervous system works, teaching people like understanding how addiction works, and again, taking it away from this notion that anyone is broken, recognizing that all of this is adaptive. Like, every single behavior we do serves a purpose.
That's so powerful.
Yeah. And so I wanted to bring a different voice to it. So I went into education and did teach for many years, and realized, again, where I could be of service the most was helping other people on board, perhaps outside of traditional educational systems, like coming to post-secondary or college, university. Everyone could benefit from learning more about behavior, especially when we hold true to the idea nobody is broken. We've adapted. We've probably picked up some habits that are taking us farther away from where we want to be. Right. But ultimately, we do it to cope. We do it to survive. We do it because we have to.
What brings you to want to study that initially? Like, what part? I understand you're learning about in university, but it's your life experience
100%
that draws you towards this field of study.
Yeah. And so as someone, and we've chatted, so we talked before when we connected, as somebody who took a very nonlinear route to education, as somebody who dropped out of high school, somebody who was, really off course, when I finally did get back on course, and I remember sitting in lectures hearing about, the disease model for addictions and all these different theories, as somebody who had lived through those experiences, I was so almost discouraged that this was the only lens that we were looking at some of these issues. We weren't looking at societal factors. We weren't looking at social determinants of health. We basically were painting this picture that this person didn't have self-control or willpower, or, they were selfish. And I remember being so upset at that idea that somebody with an addiction is selfish. And it's like somebody with an addiction has found a strategy just to cope with scenarios often that are so outside of their control. And I really noticed I leaned towards that place of compassion because I know what it feels like to be on the other side of that.
Right. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, of course.
Tell us, how do you come to be, dropping out of school? What's your upbringing like?
Yeah.
What was life like for you?
Yeah. So early years, I was super fortunate. I grew up in a super solid family system with all of the checks and boxes, right? So if you were to say, okay, what's the most ideal, optimal childhood? Like I had it. However, early, like I'm thinking like little, like grade 1 or 2. So I'm little, feeling as if something was off, that I just didn't quite fit in, that I didn't quite fit in with my peers. I didn't quite fit in anywhere. I felt very othered very early. Never really could put my finger on it because, as a little one, you don't have language. Right. And then you start to adopt and adapt all these behaviors that just try to help you fit in. You just try to find out a way to belong, a sense of, you're coping with it. And, for some, it takes the form of people pleasing. For others, it's just being a wee bit of a social chameleon where I can just change and adapt to whatever you want me to be, right, just to make it make sense. And education was always a real challenge for me, as was the social dynamics of being little. And so I remember struggling with friendships, struggling with school. And then I was identified as having serious behavioral issues and learning issues. But it wasn't with, and this is the solution or the support. It was more than, we will just like remove you from the classroom and put you over here.
Right.
So you don't disrupt the good.
So like the special needs
yes,
class.
Absolutely. So I was put in some remedial educational programs.
Right.
I believe I was in about grade 7 when we realized I actually couldn't read. But you adapt, right? You cope and you adapt. And by the time though I got to like grade 9, grade 10, I realized like school was just not for me. And I do recall an educator when I was getting ready to go to high school, picking up my classes, and an educator actually said, there's really no point because people like you, Robyne, don't finish school.
People like you.
And you're not smart enough. And they're really, you're wasting teachers' time. Like, and again, it was just this idea that like, you just can't keep up. Like, This isn't for you.
Do you internalize that or do you rebel against it?
Oh, I internalize that in every bone in my body. Despite growing up in a family system where I was supported and I was encouraged,
right.
In my mind, somehow this person saw something that, because I was so out of alignment as a person that just feels like I don't fit in this world. And this was a person who finally put their finger on it. It's because you're not smart. That's why everything is hard for you, because you're just not smart. And nobody likes you. And I remember him literally telling me, nobody likes you. And he's never met a kid that nobody liked before this much. Usually even the outcasts stick together. He's like, right. You're just something else. And again, that was, for whatever reason, I internalized that in terms of putting language to the experience. And so by the time grade 10 rolled around, I tapped out. School wasn't for me.
And so you leave school. You're living, you said you had like an idyllic relation. So home life. So I'm picturing mom, dad, maybe a sibling or two.
One sibling, mom and dad.
So like the perfect household, white picket fence.
Family,
the whole,
100%.
And in what city were you from?
So at the time we were living in Pickering. So just outside of Toronto. So living in Pickering.
Like typical residential, working class, hardworking family, great values. And so you drop out of school.
Yeah.
What does your family say? Like,
it absolutely, like the whole time that I was in this spiral, like my parents loved me so hard, but helplessly. And the reality is, I don't think that they had any idea what I was dealing with. I think they saw it again, because I think what happens is when you have resources like family that support you and whatnot, you can like essentially like show up to a point where, there's a few kind of red flags, but it's good. It's just a phase. Like she'll just go, she'll grow out of it. Right. And I think that was the moment when my parents realized like, oh no, there's a lot more going on here. And I'm sure there were some pretty substantive red flags along the way, but the dropping out of school was all of a sudden like, this is substantive. And I remember, again, it breaking my parents' heart. They just wanted to help, but not knowing how to help.
Right.
And again, there was this really interesting undercurrent of, I was so ashamed of who I had become in the context of who my family were. Like my family were loving, supportive, wonderful people. And they, in my mind, deserved a daughter way better than what I was.
Wow.
And that shame really kept me from seeking help earlier.
Were there no like parent-teacher meetings where your teacher were like, listen, we think there's an underlying problem here. Maybe she needs some extra like tutorials. Does she need some extra help? Like, what was the messaging up until, grade 9, even into grade 10 before you quit? Like,
So I was like pretty early identified as like having learning challenges, but at the time we weren't doing psychoeducational assessments. At the time, we didn't know about ADHD in young girls. We didn't understand the idea about like the rejection sensitivity that we understand about it today.
Are things better today? Like I don't have kids, so I don't know what the school system's like here, but
gosh, it depends on who you ask. Okay. I think the reality that teachers are exceptional in terms of showing up for the profession. I think the reality is teachers are burned out. I see that across the board.
Right.
I see that education in general feels like it's in a wee bit of a crisis across the country, coast to coast to coast. And I think very much the complexity of the child in the classroom, in the sense that we are seeing more complex cases than ever before in the classroom. And
why do you think that is? I want to hear about your story, but we're here. So why do you think, we're seeing more complex issues today than compared to, when you were a child?
Yeah. So I think there's kind of many different facets. We would consider this in education what we would call a wicked problem. So there's not one origin that explains everything. There's a whole bunch of competing variables. I know it's very quick for people to jump on like cell phones and technology, and they'd be like, "Oh, that's what
my brain first went to." I was like, "Yeah, let's blame TikTok."
Yeah, we're blaming TikTok. We were en route to Hell in a Handbasket before TikTok.
Okay,
I think, but I think one of the greatest factors is the fact that when we think about like the well-being of a family,
right,
and therefore the well-being of a child, I think it really comes down to like the well-being of the people in it. And I think family systems are in enormous amounts of stress and burnout. And the world has evolved so quickly that people aren't keeping up. We don't have a primary parent anymore at home who's taking care of a lot of the household responsibilities that allow children to have support and supervision.
Right.
And again, I'm a feminist. I am not suggesting we have to go back to single earner households. But what we are noticing is that when women got all of these additional rights to be able to be out in the workforce and do this, they never really negotiated a good deal because they still carried all of the full-time labor and the invisible labor that they were doing at the current time. So it's like they already had a full-time job, and then now they have a new full-time job. And the reality is the family system is just eroding. And I think people are hurting, and hurt people hurt people.
And so you're seeing that in kids and in the education system.
Absolutely. And I also think too that there's this kind of idea that things have become very polarized. So the children that are doing well are doing super well, and the children that aren't doing so hot are doing really poorly. There's no more middle, it seems like, anymore. And I think a lot of our educators, and I was an educator, I hold education very close to my heart. And I also realize like what's being asked of them right now is not sustainable. The system isn't setting up anybody for success, the child or the school system. The other piece too is that the reality is 33% of a population will respond regardless of the system or the circumstances, right? A third of the population will always be fine. We'll continue to see high flyers that doesn't matter what system you put them in, they're going to be fine.
Okay.
A third of them are going to kind of get stuck in a little bit of the stickiness, and then we're going to lose a third of the population.
And that's just like par for the course no matter what system you put them into.
Yeah, that's often what we see in the research.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So interesting. Okay, I know we detoured.
Yeah, I like it though.
So, grade 10, you drop out. Your parents are like not okay, not angry, but like concerned. They're worried.
Helpless. Yeah, worried, helpless.
What do you do?
Yeah.
Where do you go? Are you working at the time? Like, what's your plan?
Yeah, so my family ended up moving. So all of a sudden we're a new community, and we're kind of adjusting to kind of living kind of bigger city, smaller community now. Okay. And again, as I share with folks very candidly is, the people who need the most help, we ask for it in all of the wrong ways. So me asking for help and trying to figure all this out took the form of addictions. It took the form of self-harm. I remember being institutionalized at 16 in an adult psychiatric facility. Wow. And they were trying to keep me safe. Like it wasn't punitive. Right. It was literally, we just want to figure out how do we help you? Yeah. And that was pretty significant because it was the first exposure that I had to understanding mental health and emotional health. And I remember meeting all of these different people in that environment and just realizing just the complexity of what things look like. And some people were mandatory, like it was mandatory that they were there. I was there voluntarily. But again, it was just like learning all about this. And then interestingly, shortly thereafter, when I was released, I was getting ready to go back to school, like things were starting to come into place. And I remember I'd been sober at that point, and, I'd kind of moved through some treatment work, and I remember getting my learner's permit. So I'm able to drive now. And then unfortunately, or fortunately, I experienced a catastrophic car accident that just changed the trajectory in a pretty substantive way.
How old were you?
16 years old.
You were 16 years old?
I was 16 years old. So brand new driver.
So you drop out of school in grade 10. So you're like 15?
Yeah, 15, 16, yeah.
And you start using drugs?
I was using drugs before that.
Before you dropped out?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. So your addiction was like a catalyst to drop out?
Correct.
Okay. Were you already self-harming?
Yes.
How old were you when that started?
Probably, thinking back to it, I think some of my first episodes were probably grade 7, grade 8.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Like 12, 13, somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
Okay. And addiction starts around the same time?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
And so was that, and it's a bit of like a chicken and the egg question here, but do you think that you were struggling in school as a result of, the emotional issues that drive you to addiction and drive you to self-harm? Or do you think that those are the response to the issues that you're having in school?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. And looking back at it, 30 plus years later,
right.
I can actually connect the dots and actually say with confidence, undiagnosed and untreated ADHD was the catalyst that was the first domino that knocked every other one of them in play. And what I mean by that is the rejection sensitivity to the fact where, a peer when I was little could say oh, we don't want to play with you at recess, Robyne. And to a neurotypical child, it'd be okay. To me, it was I felt that rejection in my bones. I couldn't shake this sense of I'm an embarrassment to my parents. It felt like a moral injury that my parents deserved a better little girl than what I was putting up with, who didn't even have friends on the playground. The catastrophizing that happens in the mind of an ADHD child is pretty substantive.
Wow.
And that very much created this ripple effect where that not being addressed, I can see was so very much the origin of how then I got myself into a lot of predicaments that I think otherwise I wouldn't have experienced.
So interesting to try to unravel it, because people are often not knowing where to turn to. What's the underlying issue to address? What are people going to heal?
Yes.
And what are they actually experiencing more hurt from?
Yes.
So super interesting.
And what I can share with you is that always feeling othered, always feeling out of it, all of a sudden getting exposed to that peer group. So there was a very kind of substantive experience with a peer group when I was in grade 8 who introduced me to kind of drug culture, who introduced me, and their expectations for me were the first expectations I felt like I could meet. They had very little, there was more of just a code where you don't talk about anybody else's business. They had this kind of code that was oh, I could follow these rules. I actually understood the guardrails around these social environments, and I flourished there. I had clarity. I knew what was expected or not expected. And although there was such this current of the addiction culture, it was actually one of the first places I actually felt like I found my people, who also happened to be people on the outside of what we would call socially normally developed.
But I think that's the case with a lot of adolescents who enter, the world of drug subculture.
Yes.
Right? It's this place of belonging.
Yes.
And the belonging can come either from the actual peer group, or it can come just because, you're sort of united by this drug use.
Yes.
But also, I think that when you're that young and you're using especially more serious drugs, you're obviously trying to self-medicate, and 100%. You're self-medicating a pain that you don't want to talk about or can't talk about or don't know how to vocalize. And I see that a lot with some of the clients that I represent, right? They don't know how to vocalize the underlying emotional turmoil, and so they'll turn to either violence or drugs or drug trafficking, and that sort of normalizes whatever the emotional undevelopment is in a way that makes sense and allows you to cope and deal with it.
Yes.
And I think, we see that a lot. And so you're sort of fitting in for the first time, and you've now got a peer group that you understand and can relate to.
Yeah. And accepted me.
Right.
Yeah. Accepted me.
Unconditionally.
Unconditionally.
Which
100%.
is so unheard of in adolescence.
Absolutely.
And early teen years.
Yeah.
That drives you to psychiatric facility at 16.
Yes.
How long were you in the facility for?
That's a really good question. Reflecting back on it, unfortunately, I lost my mother, and we often talk about the idea that often our mothers are our knowledge holders.
Yes.
So I believe it was about 2 to 3 weeks, which isn't a long period of time, but it also is a very long period of time to be kind of taken out and then being in that type of a facility. So I think it was definitely under a month. And I do remember that there was a very kind social worker at this high school that I was at. Her name was Kip. And she was the one that pulled the fire alarm. She was the one who, because at this point I was still going to some of the classes somewhat, right? It wasn't like a clean break. It was that kind of slow erosion of attendance at school. And she was the one that pulled the fire alarm and says, you need help. And she actually drove me to the hospital and then contacted my parents, and my parents met us at the hospital. And I just remember looking at my parents and just being so sorry that, you know, I tried really, really hard not to put you through anything else and do all this. And I just did not have tools that would allow me to figure it out by myself.
Right.
Yeah.
You obviously don't figure it out in 3 weeks.
Gosh,
but,
no.
But is that enough for you to have like a bit of a wake up call where you're like, I don't want to do this anymore and I need help?
Yeah. So I think it was the first time we were actually having real conversations. Like we're actually talking about the thing versus like talking around the thing.
Right.
And I do also remember the medical team and the psychiatrist being very almost say like borderline like assertive, but a little bit around bullying, of giving my parents a hard time, especially my mother, that she was enabling all of this. And I think they really wanted to kind of write me off as just a brat, right? A petulant little brat who did some drug exploration for attention seeking.
Right.
But if they understood what was beneath the surface, or like I was hurting, like, I mean, like physical, emotional pain, like just open wounds. It was not just attention seeking behavior, which I think when you look at a kid who comes from a pretty solid home,
right,
it's quick to point the finger and be like, oh, this is just Robyne getting attention or wanting attention. And it was like, I was just begging to die.
Wow.
Yes.
It's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
It's powerful because it's like to be at that age and to think so hopelessly.
No hope was there. None.
Wow.
Yeah. And I even write about this idea that for me, it was my first episode when I think of hope as this little pilot light that just like, even things could be really, really bad, super scary, but there's like always just that little kind of little spark that's like, okay, maybe this is going to work out somehow. Don't know how it's going to work out, but there's still just that tiny little flicker. That was the first time in my life that had gone out. It was gone. Like there was, even when they would say things like, okay, you're 16, like imagine what it'll feel like at 18. I could imagine my family members and other people that I knew. I could imagine them at 18 years old, or, you know, fast forward 2 years with all of the energy, cognitive strain, everything. I could not see myself still alive in 2 years. I didn't see myself in the future. And that was one of the hardest obstacles to overcome, was actually like allowing myself to start to imagine that my life could feel different.
How do you make that shift?
Yeah.
Like for people that are listening to the show and maybe feel completely helpless, they cannot picture life in, you know, a year, 2 years, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
How were you able to change your life, your mindset?
Absolutely. So I remember still institutionalized, so still in the hospital. And I remember my mom would come and see me during visiting hours. And it was the first time I was able to articulate that, like, I can't see a future. Like it hurts so bad what today feels like. Like, I don't even want to know how bad this is going to be tomorrow. And my brain is not even letting me imagine healing or recovery. And I remember my mother sitting on the edge of this, like, you know, hospital bed thing. And it's like, I still remember like the crunch of the mattress cover. Like, it was just not a warm, fuzzy place.
Right.
And this sterile room. And I remember her sitting down, and I remember her just putting her hand on my hand. And she said, "Can I tell you what I see for you?" And she said, "I imagine one day you are going to take all of these struggles and you will understand it in a way that even I don't understand it as somebody who's never lived it, and you're going to help people." And she's like, "And I imagine one day all of this love of just wanting family and connection, that you will find it with one day in your own family, and you'll build it and you will co-create it." And I just remember her like talking this over me. She's like, "I see you strong. I see you sharing. I see you doing that. I see you happy and healthy." And she just kept on telling me, like, I can see that. And then I remember borrowing that belief just to be like, can I, you know, just kind of like try it on, right? Like, what would that be like? And she would even ask me like, well, what kind of mom would you want to be? Right? Tell me about what kind of mom would you want to be? What kind of student would you want to be? How would you want to make a livelihood? What kind of car would you want to drive? Like, she just started like challenging me in the most loving, just this embrace of unconditional support,
right,
that whatever you want that to look like, that I won't have to figure it out by myself, that she'd help me get there.
Was it easier to picture this sort of almost like fantasy world that was 20, 30 years ahead, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to just like 2 years? Like,
100%.
was it easier for you to dream so much bigger and so much further away than where you were in that moment?
Yeah. I absolutely love how you catch that, because very few people understand that the immediacy, there was no hope.
Right.
If I did that long forecast, that's where I could actually have just a wee bit of agency to see what was possible. And I didn't have to worry about all the steps to get there. I just needed to start dream casting of what could be possible. The immediate absolutely was way too scary, right? Even people be like, oh, what are you going to do when you finish high school? It's like, dude, I don't even think I'm going to finish grade 9 math, right? Like, let alone high school.
Right.
And so that was just too terrifying. But the future hadn't been written yet. And that was something my mom just challenged me to imagine. And when I would dream, she gently and encouraged me, could you dream bigger? Right? Like, why not? And it was just this freedom that came into, don't worry about how to get there. Just get a general idea of what you want it to feel like when you do get there. And then we're going to start working backwards to create those feelings.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it's easier to dream huge and then create the plan to get there rather than like incrementally going through your plan.
That's right.
Sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes.
I mean, for me, I got through school like incrementally. Like I got to finish high school and then I got to get into university and then I don't know what I'm going to do after that, but I'll figure it out. So for me, it was like those baby steps. But yeah, sometimes like that big picture dream helps to create, you know, the borders. It's almost like a puzzle.
That's right.
Right. You never start in the center of a puzzle.
That's right.
You start creating the borders and then you can fill it in.
Yeah. And reflecting back on that now, like with the education that I do have and the work that I do now, I can look back at it and realize that essentially everyone was really trying to get me to goal set, right? Like, what's the goal? We got to finish high school. We got to get you sober. These are the goals. They were the goals. And it was the first time my mother shifted it. And again, this wasn't her training. This wasn't her background. This was just who she was as a person. She was the one who shifted it from goal setting for me to feeling setting. Like, how do you want to feel? And I remember saying, I want to feel safe in my body, right? I want to trust myself that when it gets really scary, these really dark impulses don't take over. Like, I want to feel as if like I can ask for help, and I want to feel like I'm not embarrassing, like I'm not an embarrassment to you, right? I want to feel like I belong somewhere. So we started with the feelings and then started to think about, okay, well, what kind of systems are going to make those more probable that you can have more days that feel like that?
Oh, interesting. Mm-hmm. So your interest in systems and behavior started really from your own experience
100%.
And figuring out how to live, literally, how to like continue existing.
Yes.
And then how to move past and building on that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you finish your time in the institution.
Yes.
You go back home to your family.
Yes.
You go back into school.
So I was about to go back into school. So we had some pretty big breakthroughs. I was on meds that got me pretty feeling stable. Like things were pretty good. Like we're like, okay, we're through the storm, right? That was, I remember my mom specifically saying, and she had just picked me up the Alanis Morissette CD, Jagged Little Pill. We were driving back listening to this new album, and she's like, we're through the storm. Like, we're through the storm. And she's like, and it was so interesting because she had an encounter with a person several years before who shared with my mom that your daughter's going to have a hard season, but she will get through it. And I just thought that was so remarkable that this woman had come into my mom's life and had shared with her that she just really believed that Robyne might get off track, but don't worry, you'll get through it. And I remember her sharing that with me and thinking, okay, we're through it. And getting ready to go back to school. I was getting ready for this semester that picks up at the end of January in Ontario. And I got my learner's permit. So I now could drive your G2. Right. And then I was out with a group of acquaintances, I would say, not quite friends, because I didn't really have friends in this new community, but had these acquaintances. And I was driving back home, and that's the night where a snowstorm rolled in, and I didn't know how to drive very well in the snow. And the vehicle ended up sliding off the road, and it went down an embankment, and my vehicle ended up crashing through the ice, and it sank in the Otonabee River with me trapped inside.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, 16 years old. Drowning, entombed in a car. Yeah. And I recall in that moment, I wasn't actually afraid at first. I felt really angry that after all we had gone through, like we thought we were through it.
Right.
And I just couldn't grapple with this idea about like what this was going to do to my mom. And I was just so worried about what this was going to do to her, because she showed up. She did everything I needed her to do. And somehow I still got taken out. And I remember thinking about her in that moment. And it was just this deep feeling. It was just an emotional echo when I started to think about my mother, where she just had such a belief in me that I could figure things out and that I could do hard things. And she would tell me that often, that you can do hard things, like just step by step, one moment at a time, one thought at a time, one choice at a time. And I remember I was able to get myself out of that vehicle. Oh. And so I couldn't get the seatbelt off because the impact of the vehicle hitting the ice had actually blocked the seatbelt mechanism. But I remember I would literally wiggled out under the seatbelt, and the vehicle had already started to crush, but I was able to get out through the window, and I was able to get out through the window. I recall getting to the other side though, and I just remember the pull of the water. Like it just felt violent how it was pulling me downstream, and the vehicle was turning in the water, and I didn't know what direction to swim. Like I didn't even know which way to try to go. There was dark, and the headlights the electrical system hadn't shorted out yet. So there were parts, I recall, where there was this eerie green highlighted water almost. When the lights would hit certain parts of the water, that would be illuminated. But again, zero idea which way up or down was. And I remember that moment just kind of slowing down my thoughts and realize, okay, the only way to get my direction in water is to exhale, to let go of all the breath that I was holding, because I knew my bubbles would rise in water.
Right.
And I remember just swimming after those wee little bubbles. And I was wearing like jeans, a winter coat, winter boots, like pushing against this current that I just remember feeling it was just so violent against my body, just pushing me. And I was able to make my way to the surface, and I was able to get through near the middle of the channel where the ice was thinner. And thankfully that night, there was a gentleman by the name of Joseph. His name was Joseph Todd. Just a random guy in his 30s driving home from shift work. And Joseph just happened to see my car tracks in the snow, he said. And he drove along the road and saw me out there. And there was actually interesting that he said that how he saw me originally was that because the electrical system hadn't shorted out yet in the car, that there was part of the ice that was glowing. So it was like kind of highlighting where I'd been. And so he just went along the side of the road to see and saw me out there and pulled over the pickup truck. He grabbed wood and a chain from the back, used the wood to make an X to support his body weight. And Joseph crawled out onto that ice and slid out the chain and dragged me to shore.
Wow.
Yeah, and he was awarded the Governor General's Award for bravery, the highest civilian award for somebody who risks their life to save a stranger.
Incredible.
But you know, it was so remarkable.
Your will to live.
There you go. Absolutely. 100%.
In that circumstance, like having just, come out of being institutionalized, feeling hopeless, not even able to see what you might want your life to look like 2 years away. And here you are
fighting for this life.
Fighting literally for your life.
And, it was one of the most, so obviously when we have these parts of our story, these old stories, it feels like you kind of I've unpacked it, I've studied it, I've had support. I was a huge advocate for therapy to learn how to process it so I could talk about it and write about it and even do research upon it. But, sometimes it's interesting where you kind of feel like the stories come to an end. And just this past January, I had the opportunity to interview a Navy SEAL, Commander Mark Devine. And I was sharing my story to Mark, and he paused afterwards and he said, "You made yourself savable."
Wow.
He said, "I commend you that you acknowledge your rescuer."
Right.
That is so important. We're not taking anything away from the efforts of Joseph Todd.
Absolutely.
He said, "But do you realize you made yourself savable that night?" And he said, you need to take some of that as well. And having a Navy SEAL look at you, full on badass Navy SEAL tell you hey, you made yourself savable. That brought this new dimension to a story that I have shared with people so many places and spaces, but I have relived myself, that added this new perspective.
Right.
And I think sometimes, especially when people are going through hard things, there is this idea that we have to make ourselves savable to a degree and then trust that somebody's going to be there on the other side.
Yeah. I mean, that was, as you were talking, the highlight for me was just thinking, wow, you could have just stayed in the car.
Yeah.
You could have just taken a moment say, this is it.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mom.
Exactly.
You know, and not crawled out from underneath the seatbelt, not found a way out of the car, not taken a minute to exhale and followed the bubbles up. Like there was so many parts in that situation where you could have just allowed yourself to succumb.
Yeah.
And instead, you know, fought your way up to the surface and allowed Joseph to come and save you is unbelievable.
And what's so remarkable is to hold space into presence. Like 3 weeks before that, I was begging to die.
Right.
Like I was begging just to make all of this stop. And so this kind of significant event altered my life in so many different ways, where if my mom and the support I received hadn't restarted that little spark,
right,
I, without a doubt, would have just taken that as a sign that this is what you wish for.
Right.
This is what you're praying for. But I knew there was more to the story.
Yeah. Amazing. Do you still keep in touch with Joseph?
Interestingly, so the children, I remember years ago, they wrote an article in the paper just because I'm in a small town, and they did kind of like, where's she now type thing.
Right.
And the next morning after that had been shared, my children were walking into their elementary school, and they literally walked by their like secretary who they'd walked by like multiple mornings for years and years. And she shared that was her brother. And shared some updates, and so I've heard updates and whatnot. But he's a very, very humble person who says he did what anyone would have done, which I do not agree with. He was a remarkable person, and I'm very well aware that my miracle was in motion that night, and he was a key player.
And so, I'm sure you had to do some recovery after that.
That was a big one. Yes. Yeah.
Physical, emotional. I can't even imagine the trauma of like that near-death experience. You know, as you were describing it, I'm thinking in my head, like, how cold was it? Like, how long does it take you to actually physically warm up?
Yeah.
From that moment.
I think you'd make the argument you never quite do. Right. When you've experienced that degree of temperatures, I'm sure physically we do, but emotionally there's always that feeling.
Right.
The physical, as most people who've experienced significant life events will share, like the physical stuff is often the easier because it's visible. Right. It's visible. It's like you see x-rays, you see scans, you know how much weight you can put on your feet, you know how much like you can do grip strength again, like all of those things. But the invisible scars are the ones that are so challenging, because the invisible scars, and even like mental health, like that's an invisible condition where, you know, I think a lot of times we have a lot more, you know, we should express a lot more gratitude and spaciousness for people when we see physical things where we're like, oh, I see that, so I understand it.
Right.
But when things are invisible, people don't understand it the same way. And so the invisible pieces took a lot longer to draw into a place where I can find acceptance. And for me personally, being able to have the right therapists at the right time, the right clinician practices at the right time was instrumental. And I often get asked how I can talk about my story as somebody who has been diagnosed with PTSD, but you then get on stages around the world and you share your most vulnerable moments. And for me, and again, everyone has a different experience, but for me, the EMDR was absolutely radically transformed my experience with healing, where I could talk about it, but the flashbacks and the fear aren't there anymore. Mm-hmm.
And so is that experience what drives you to study psychology ultimately?
Yeah, very much.
And how do you do that? How do you go back to school? Because we, I know we've taken a bit of a circuitous route here.
I love it.
But how do you go from being, the girl who's told don't bother going to high school because
you won't finish,
people like you don't graduate, which I still can't wrap my head around. But, how do you go from that to entering university or even dreaming of going to university? How do you get the mindset to be like, I'm taking this school thing all the way? Yeah.
So again, I really appreciate how you're framing the question. So when I got to the other side of this accident, and now I'm starting to, and I'm not enrolled in school at this point, so I'm not going back to that school. I'm kind of all of a sudden kind of at a blank slate, right? So it's like, okay, so you navigated this. We thought we were out of the storm. Nope, we had one more, right? And now we're in this season.
Right.
And it very much was a blank slate. So I was not registered in school. I had kind of no big plan other than, my therapy appointments, physio appointments and whatnot. And then I remember sitting there and realizing that I didn't really have any friends, right? I was this 16-year-old child turning 17 years old who probably had a little bit more life than the average kid. And I didn't really have any friends, and realized anyone from that point before couldn't come with me into my future. Like there wouldn't be a way that I could stay sober, that I could stay in this kind of place of where I wanted to be if any of the past came with me. And I very much remember having this kind of moment where realizing that this is day one, and I have to start building, and realize trying to make friends at 17 with this backstory, it's not easy. And because they're all just starting to experiment with drinking. They're just starting to experiment with risk behavior, and you're already on the other side of it. Right. So it's like, I can't do that kind of stuff. And I realized the only place where it sort of made sense for a 17-year-old to be was to be in studies, like be in school, even not physically in a building,
right?
But I could still do my courses. So I actually finished that semester with correspondence. And back in the day, that's when you literally would mail your assignments to a teacher, and they would you get these big packages back, and never met them in person. But I was able to cobble enough of that I was able to basically salvage my education up to that point. And then in the fall, I realized that I wanted to go to have a high school experience that wasn't like the 3 other high schools that I'd been to. But I did it very carefully and I'm sure, I've crossed paths with people who knew me for that 1 year when I physically was in a new school, new town, new building, and all the things. And I just kind of did my own thing, because I was very aware that I just wanted to get a high school diploma so I could apply to college and I could maybe be a social worker, right? That is what I was thinking about. So I didn't really invest in friendships in my senior year of high school. It was just kind of walking along the edge of it, where I was part of it. I wasn't really in it, but it was enough that I was able to have this transcript, a very messy transcript, that I then was able to apply to college. And it was one school was willing to give me a shot at a post-secondary, and that was St. Lawrence College in Kingston. And they said that, I remember talking to the admissions office, and they needed some explanation of what this was, because I had courses from here and courses from there, and this
big gaps
and whatnot. And I explained to them that I wanted to do right by them, and I knew they were taking a chance on me, but that I wanted to see if this is possible for me. And they gave me a spot, and I remember even my first week realizing I didn't have any learning to learn skills. So I remember going to my learning teacher, actually, who literally taught learning. I remember going up to Professor McKay and saying, I don't think I know how to learn. I've been winging it, not well. And I remember him sitting down with me, and he's like, okay, well, how would you approach this assignment? And he's like,
so creating a system.
And it was one of many faculty at St. Lawrence who took the time to actually help me develop the learning to learn skills, because I didn't even know what I didn't know. And it wasn't until I was in my second year when I was actually finally had the conversation of, do you realize that you have complex learning disabilities and ADHD, and got the supports I needed. And then all of a sudden it was an unlock. It was literally I found this, was able to decipher this mystery that was school. And soon as I saw it through that lens, all of a sudden it was just there was just clarity that, hey, this school thing is actually not that hard.
And then unstoppable.
Pretty much.
So you go to St. Lawrence for college? That was to be a social worker?
Yeah, 3-year behavioral science but when I was there after my first year, I realized this school thing is so easy. I picked up a second diploma. So I did my 3-year behavioral sciences there and addictions treatment and prevention worker program. So I picked up 2 diplomas.
Did you mail it back to that shithead that told you people like you don't do school?
I love this. I do have moments though, because I remember one of his beefs with me is that he's like, you talk too much. And, but again, it was overcompensating, right? It's like, if you can't read and you don't know what you're doing, you're going to talk your way through it.
Right.
And there are moments where I would never do this, but I do have moments where I'm like, damn, I get paid really well to speak now. It's kind of funny that you're like, oh, you speak too much. It's like, I get now paid very well to speak on stages. So
what happens?
Yeah, we figured it out. Yes.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So you do 2 degrees from St. Lawrence.
I do. Yeah.
And then what? Straight into like a university program, master's program. What happens?
So
because you are like educated beyond.
There you go.
Which I think, is amazing unto itself, but so much more when it factors in your struggles in school.
Yeah.
And then your struggles through adolescence. And then, this near-death experience that truly changes you as a person.
Yes.
And you've already said, like, you still live with it. You always will. And I think a lot of people who've experienced anything that puts them that close to the edge will always carry some of that with. And it's a matter of what you do with it. And a lot of people at that point would have easily spiraled, like right on the cusp of addiction and self-harm. So easy to stay like spinning in that. This actually puts you on the other side of that trajectory. And so, it's amazing. So what happens next for you? What does that look like?
Yeah. So, and I think again, to really just pull that thread on what you said, because my coping strategies and my behaviors always were like harmful.
Right.
Like it was actually learning what other things work. Right. So that kind of practice, even with like decreasing the self-harm, it's like, okay, you're doing this because you're showing us how much it hurts. Could you tell us? Like, so can you like tell, not show? Right. So like actually learning to say like, wow, okay, that really dark, intrusive thoughts popping in and being able to say, hey, you know what, that part of me, I realize that you were just trying to keep me safe and you're just trying to help me get through it. I've learned other strategies now. Now I can take my worry for a walk. Now I can ask for help. Now I can just realize that I can just walk away from situations where before I was staying in them because I thought that's what polite kids did. And I started to all of a sudden start to learn other strategies.
Right.
But I think what's so interesting is for probably a solid decade after I was sober and clean and no longer self-harming, is that the impulse was always still there. The impulse was there, but it was meeting that impulse and instead of acting on it, choosing something different. And I think that's sometimes where some of us get stuck, is that we have that as our default setting. It almost feels like we're prone to go to dark. We're prone to go to depression. We're prone to go to anxiety. And instead of trying to like get rid of it, recognize like, yeah, okay, so that's like the antecedent. That's the first impulse that I feel. And now I get to have a choice. And there's this wee bit of room in between the antecedent and the behavior where I get to make a choice. And then what I did for the next decade was just pack that choice, basically repository, where I could pull out other things while also honoring that part of me that was really hurting, it was always just trying to protect me, even though it was protecting me in all the wrong ways.
Does it disappear at some point? You said it's like it's only for 10 years?
Yeah.
What happens after 10 years?
So I think what happens out of 10 years, you start to develop these other kind of go-to strategies where, yes, it's still there and it's still being activated. Like understanding how brain networking system knows is like, I know those impulses are still there. They're never going to go away.
Right.
But recognizing that I just have way more agency than I would have thought that I had years ago. So for example, like even, if I'm under-resourced, if I'm like jet-lagged, underfed, under-resourced, tired, my thoughts go dark. So a practice now is, I don't really believe anything I think after 8 p.m., right? By that point, my meds have run out. By that point, I'm like, I'm good. That's a tomorrow thought. And just learning that before I would sit, I would like marinate in the fear and marinate in that misery. Whereas now it's like, oh, is it after 8? Yes, it is after 8 p.m. Eastern time. Not going to go there. And then I just distract. And eventually you just start to learn these different ways of, and it's not really coping. It's just you learn these different ways of just being who you are, recognizing that we have these parts that are always going to be there. And that part, I hold no ill will towards that part that really, really hurt. She was just trying so hard to make sense of something that she didn't have words to express.
It's so interesting that I don't think I've ever heard that before, where like a thought or a negative impulse crosses the mind, and instead of trying to understand it in the moment or try to like distract in that moment, because obviously like distraction is a huge technique that's positive, right? It works. That's the reality. Like you get a distraction to do something, whether it's like the alcoholic to reach for a drink, the addict to reach for a drug, like whatever the case may be, to honor it, but just say, no, not right now.
Yeah.
Let's address that in 12 hours.
Yeah.
And if it's still there in 12 hours, we can figure out what happens next. What an interesting concept.
Yeah. And also recognizing that there's certain things that I've learned about myself that, again, if I'm under-resourced, right, I am not making wise choices. So taking the pressure off that I expect myself to have all this willpower and all this motivation, it's like, no, I'll have a system that lets me be able to weather that urge, that will weather that impulse. And, it's the same kind of idea, even with, with my children growing up. I remember telling them like, hey, you have an impulse right now to be mad. Like that's human, but we don't have to be mean, right? You can be mad and I want you to honor your feelings, be mad. That's fine, but you don't be mean. Right. And it's like the behavior is what really counts, right? We have no control of our feelings. We actually have no control of our thoughts, right? They're absolutely just pop in and out. We can generate thoughts, but we don't actually have the ability not to think of certain things. And the more we try, the louder it gets. And so really it's just, it's okay to be mad. It's okay to be this or that. It's what we do with it that matters. And it's that next step that, again, gets people into difficult situations versus just recognizing the impulse is completely natural. Like it'd actually be more abnormal for somebody in my scenario, in my case, not to have those dark impulses than it would be for them to like just go away altogether. Right. They're still always there. We just know what to do with them.
Yeah. Just a matter of managing it now.
Yeah, absolutely. But also not being afraid of it. Right. Right. Like not being embarrassed or ashamed by it. Right. It's, if anything, as one of the things we see, especially with ADHD and that deep, empath component, it makes me really good in other parts of my job. Right. It makes me a really fantastic mom and a great partner. And recognizing that to be able to have this skill here, it only makes sense that there's an opposite force that you have to make sure that you put some guardrails around because it's powerful and it can work for good or it can work for harm.
Is this all part of what you teach now?
Oh, it's a great question. I would say like I teach like, if you imagine like, the deepest ocean, what I'm teaching is literally just like the waves at the top. Like very rarely, unless I'm doing like one-on-one work with someone in that lens of like coaching for them to really figure out how do you design your day? Right. Then no, we're just at the surface and most of this kind of stuff, but it informs everything that I do. And again, I think there's a place for therapy and for people to do that deep, deep work. That's like, I pay a therapist for confidentiality, right? Like, there's a place for therapy to be super useful, but I also think there's a place to get some coaching, and coaching is not a regulated profession in Ontario. So like anybody essentially can call themselves a coach, but the right person with the right understanding can really help you have some unlocks. And I love when I work with people one-on-one and be like, okay, so what are the behaviors that are getting you closer to your goal? And what are the behaviors that are getting you farther away from your goal? And one of my kind of key questions I love to ask folks is, because most of the people I work with are high performers like yourself. And the idea of like, are you a high performer because of your habits? Or are you a high performer despite your habits?
Oh, interesting.
The vast majority are high performing despite how they take care of themselves. So imagine what's possible if we could figure out the unlock of those particular habits, that if we could essentially shift, how much spaciousness or even a greater level of contentment and excellence you can achieve when we start working with our biology, which is pretty fun.
That sounds like fun.
It is pretty fun. It's pretty cool to see. Like, it's really cool to watch people have these moments where they realize, damn, I'm working against myself. Like I can work with myself, including accepting some of those bumpy parts, right? Accepting some of those, parts of our past that feel like a setback. So often it's a setup for us to learn something about ourselves that otherwise would never have been discoverable.
Now, you do speaks like around the world and to large corporations.
Yeah. And groups. Mm-hmm.
Like really large.
Some of them, yeah.
You've achieved like some really incredible international success. Truly.
Thank you.
Truly. And it's amazing to see, all the accolades like on your social media,
Thank you.
On your website. Your book, I hope so, just hit the bestsellers list on Globe and Mail, which is also like amazing.
Thank you.
Before we close out, I would love for you to just talk about what the idea behind I hope so is.
Yeah.
And then we're going to tell people how to actually access
Thank you.
You and access, your materials, because really I think it provides a missing link that I often hear from people. And I often have people contacting me about situations they're struggling through, and I never purported to be a therapist, or trying to help strategize, only because I'm not equipped to. But if I can bring in an expert like yourself to be able to share that knowledge and to share that learning, I want to do that. I want to be able to give that out there. So what's I hope so?
I love that.
What does that mean? I hope so, other than like the obvious.
Yeah, well, it's exactly it. So this this kind of idea of just how powerful it is to be able to say I hope so. And we know that hope is a strategy. And I love when I meet resistors that say like hope is not a strategy. And we know it does change people physiologically.
Well, what does it mean? Like for someone listening who's like, I don't even know what you're talking about right now.
So ultimately, hope is, if we like break it down, it's comes down to this idea of trust, that we trust that things are going to work out. I think where people get stuck is they often exchange hope with optimism. Optimism is I'm attached to an outcome. Like I'm optimistic that I'm going to get this result, or I'm optimistic I'll get this job, or I'm optimistic this relationship will work. That means that I'm staying elevated as long as the outcome is what I want it to be. Okay. So that's optimism, right? I'm choosing to trust that, I want this to be like that. Hope is this deep, quiet, but mighty force in the human body that says, whatever comes, it's going to be okay. I'm going to be able to figure this out. It's trusting that we're well resourced. It's trusting that we're well supported. It's trusting that if it's meant for us, it will find us. If it's not meant for us, it's going to pass us by. And that's exactly how it's supposed to be. So it's a deep trust. And for some people, it's in greater resources, like greater power, higher power, God, universe, however you want to describe it. But it ultimately changes the lens in which we see the world. And the key is that I can't lecture somebody into hope. I can't argue somebody into hope. The major mover is for somebody to encounter hope. Because when you encounter hope, it activates part of your body that all of a sudden you see things completely different. So it's a hope encounter. So I'll give you an example if that's okay.
Yeah, because I'm trying to turn my mind on it.
I love this. Okay, so a wee while ago, I'm flying from Vancouver back to Toronto, and I get on the plane, and I'm already sitting in my seat in the aisle, and this older gentleman comes walking on the plane. And let me tell you, he was so distinguished looking. Like he was in his suit, but even just how he was carrying his suitcase, like he literally was just special. As the kiddos would say, his aura score off the charts, right? Like this guy is special. And he sits down in the aisle next to me. And there was already an elderly woman sitting on the other side, already in her seat. And she looked over and she was like, oh my gosh, you look so handsome. And I was just like, you shoot your shot, sister, right? Like I was excited for her. And then she asked the gentleman, like, where are you going? Right. Like you're dressed so nicely. And the gentleman said that he was on his way to Toronto tonight to see his daughter, and that he was going to be meeting his granddaughter for the very first time. Aww. And he wanted to dress for the occasion. Aww. So I'm bawling, right? Like I'm over here bawling my face off. And then so that happens. And then we get off the plane and, waiting to kind of get our way out there. And a woman behind me says like, oh gosh, that flight was awful. There was so many turbulence. That was awful flight, like gross. Da, da, da. And I paused and I said to her, yeah, it was pretty bumpy, 100%. But can I just share with you what I saw at the beginning of the flight? And I said, that gentleman in that 3-piece suit, he's dressed like that because he's going to meet his granddaughter for the very first time. And she's like, oh my gosh, like, really? And so it's not that we discount the turbulence,
right?
But we stay open to recognize there are these little micro moments and behaviors happening every single day all around us that gives us a different aperture in which we see the world.
I love that. Mm. And that is like the basis upon which I Hope So is developed.
Yeah. So I Hope So goes through a few different kind of journeys.
Right.
One of them, it talks about the cost in society and families of hopelessness. When we look at the state of the world right now, yes. And I know you shared, people ask you like, how do we fix Toronto? Like there's, the unhomed population and addiction and just crime, it feels rampant. That's evidence of a society and a system that's lost hope.
Yeah.
It's where,
and I see it, people giving But people who have given up on life, given up on their future, given up on their abilities, they're struggling and they're like, why should I bother?
What's the point?
Putting in the effort, energy, and time it takes to get to a place that I don't think I'm ever going to get to.
Yeah, absolutely.
I see it all the time.
It's the cost of hopelessness. Like when we look at society, when we look at conflict, when we look at all of the issues,
right?
It's when all of a sudden we don't see a possibility of working collaboratively, right? So not even in extreme examples like that, even in like kind of corporate, you know, we see the people at the top that really get it, they're collaborating. People at the bottom are competing, right? Like it's just this kind of idea where when we start to like feel like it's us versus them, it's like this lone wolf kind of mentality. Right. This is the consequence. It's when people don't trust their neighbors. It's when people don't believe, like, what's the point? And, you know, the expression's often used. It's like, you know, shoveling when it's still snowing, right? Like, what's the point, right? It's, well, actually, if you keep doing it, it actually does make it easier, right? But it's really hard to see the cost of helplessness and hopelessness, which is what we're stuck in right now.
Right.
And the arrested development of people post the pandemic has just exacerbated an underlying condition, is what we're seeing. So I Hope So talks a wee bit about the fact that there's a cost to being hopeless. And then it also talks about routes and avenues to cultivate hope practices. And we also see that hope is the through line that makes resiliency possible. And it actually is the through line that makes well-being and wellness possible, especially when it comes to mental health. And one of the concepts we talk about in the book is, you know, when somebody receives, for example, a health diagnosis, right? You know, person's been diagnosed with cancer. Terrible, horrible, awful. People show up with casseroles. People run 5-kilometer charity events. When people are diagnosed with mental health conditions, there are no casseroles.
Right.
People are not showing up. They're pointing fingers at parents and family systems and saying, what have you done? Right? So even how we treat people who experience difficulty, we put it on them. And there's not a lot of hope in what that looks like. And in the book, we talk about how do we course correct that, because there is plenty of hope. And the beautiful thing is hope is limitlessness. There's no limit to how much hope somebody can have, because every hope encounter strengthens this capacity to see the world differently and act differently and hence behave differently.
Wow. I love that.
Thank you.
Where can people find I Hope So?
The book, I Hope So, it's at any of your favorite bookstores, your local bookstores, and also on all the popular chains. And there's more information about it on the website.
Okay. And where's the website?
The website.
Let's give everybody the website. There you go. We'll connect.
Yes.
Obviously, we'll have links.
Dr._Robyne HD is the easiest, and Robin has an E. And so, yeah, Dr. Robyne at the website or on social. And again, I love having these conversations. And thank you for asking such thoughtful questions. You're a remarkable interviewer, and this has been a treat. So thank you for spending time with me.
You have made it easy. Your journey is honestly incredible. What you do is incredible. And I say this truly, the questions that you answer in the work that you're doing are questions that I get asked and I don't know the answers to, right? Like how to connect people to the right systems, the right way of thinking, how to make those changes. Because at the end of the day, so many people do want to course correct their behavior, and they're struggling. They're struggling. And so I really, I hope that those who are and need to ask those questions will find Dr. Robyne and all of the ways in which you are doing such incredible work to put out these solutions for people. So thank you so much for coming on and for sharing your story. Like,
thank you.
I know that I've heard it. You and I sat on a panel together and I was absolutely just like blown away. And so it's really amazing. And I know both of our moms are smiling right now.
I love it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for spending time with me on this episode of Life by Design. I appreciate if you have a moment to pay this forward, share it with someone who you think might benefit from the ideas shared in this episode. If you're feeling so inspired, please also rate and review the podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Again, thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. Take good care, and I'll see you next time.